Bob, welcome to the podcast.
Carey, thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege to be here. I'm excited to chat.
Well, I read your book. You asked me to endorse it. I thought it was great, and I thought, we could do a fun interview on this because money is something that impacts everybody's life, and you've got a bit of a different take on it than I've seen, and you also got a fascinating story. So it sort of starts because I'm always interested in how people turn sort of their story into a day job, which is what you've done, right? This is what you do full time. Not only write books, but you help people, you coach people on money. And we got a lot of young listeners listening. And when you were 20, you found yourself stuck in the middle of a busy road where a lot of people get stuck. What happened?
Yeah. So this was kind of my turning point moment, if you will, in my financial world, because up until this point, I thought I knew everything about money. Like I had worked at a bank for a few years. I grew up wanting to be an accountant. I was kind of one of those people. And the reality is that I was kind of a complete financial mess. I just didn't know it or I didn't believe it. And so this particular day, I'm driving down this road in South Florida, and it's right in front of a minor league ballpark. And there was a game that was starting in like a half an hour. So there's a lot of traffic and car just driving down this road. All of a sudden the car just stops, like right in the middle of the road. It stopped so fast that I couldn't even pull over to the side. So I'm instantly sitting there. Like you said, I'm 20 years old. I know nothing about cars. I don't know what's going on here, but I start turning the key, trying it again and again. It's just not starting. And, a broken down car, it's like, that's an issue. But this was becoming a really big issue because the reason I was driving is because I was actually I just picked up my paycheck and I was going to the bank to then take it to my landlord to pay my rent that was due in 3 hours. And again, not that big of a deal. And if I would have been late, it would have been a $50 late fee. And, and that's not that big of a deal for most people. But for me, this was a big deal because that paycheck I just gotten was barely enough to cover my rent payment. And so if I missed that with that 3 hour window, then now it's like, all right, I can't afford this $50 late payment. I had $7 in my checking account. I had no savings. I had one credit card that was about $264 from being maxed out. So it's like you get the picture. Like all of the stuff is just kind of happening now. And I'm sitting in this car thinking, what am I going to do? Like, how do I get this car towed, repaired, and then get back to the bank how do I do all this stuff in 3 hours? And then to add all this, my two buddies were coming down the next day. I had to pick them up from the airport to celebrate my 21st birthday because it was the next day. It's like, all this stuff, and I'm like sitting in this car. His cars are driving by. I was looking out the window, looking at me, and I'm realizing I'm in a mess. And I didn't even realize I was in a mess, And so it was that moment where I prayed out to God, cried out to God. I'm like, Lord, I don't know what's going on. I need help. If you have a better way, like I want to hear it. And that was kind of the thing that kicked it off for me, just realizing I had a problem and asking God for help.
Okay, so you had a problem. What happened? Because you're not there now and you built, what was your day job? Did you have day jobs before you did well, first of all, describe SeedTime and where you are now, and then we'll kind of reverse engineer.
Yeah. So long story short, at this point, I am currently a podcaster, blogger, writer, soon to be author, all these things, helping people with money. And that's what SeedTime is. It was just kind of birthed out of that. Out of that moment, that broken down moment, I realized I need to learn about this. So I began reading every book I could find on money. And I even began reading the Bible, found out the Bible actually talks about money. And I was kind of fascinated by this intersection. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to start a website where I talk about this stuff. And this is way back in 2007. And so that's what I started to do. That's when SeedTime was born. And then there's some other crazy stories of how we got from there to being full-time and all that. But that's the gist of it.
Well, take us there. So, I mean, you went back to your day job. You started reading books and then when did you start your website? 2007. So that was
2007. Yeah. I didn't know what a blog was at the time. I ended up telling a buddy of mine, hey, I have this idea. I want to write a new article each day and put it up. And he's like, that's a blog, man. I don't know what a blog is. It's 2007. How many people know what a blog is? So he taught me what a blog is. And then I went to blogger.com and started one. And that was kind of the birth of the whole thing. But yeah.
And what was it? Like a follow me as I figure this out, or, hey, I just learned this and I'm sharing it with you, or what was it?
Very much I'm learning this. Come along with me. I'm the expert on all things money. It was very much, this is my story. I'm figuring it out. If you want to learn, let's do it together type of thing.
And did anybody show up in 2007? It's funny. That's the same year I started a blog in 2007.
There you go. You get it. So 2007, it was probably my mom and my grandma. But then, as time went on, more and more, I guess they told a whole bunch of people because more and more people started showing up. And and it got to the point. Yeah, do you want me to go into the story of how we got to
I want to hear that. I really am.
All right.
Let's do how this was this.
Yeah, this was a pretty crazy thing for me. But 2007 to 2008, somewhere in there, I'm working on this blog. And somewhere in that point, I think it was 2008, I got a pink slip. I was working at a brokerage financial services company, and we merged with another company. And basically, my boss calls me into me and everybody in our department into the conference room and says, "Hey guys, you're all getting laid off. We merged. They don't need us anymore. We're all getting laid off." And so I went home and told Linda, and I started looking for another job. And meanwhile, as I'm looking for a job, I just kind of sensed God kind of leading me to not look for another job, which felt
that's always
insane.
A good message to bring to your spouse. Hey, I feel led not to seek employment.
To become a professional blogger, honey, in 2008. Yeah. So that's kind of where I was with all this. I kind of felt God kind of tugging me in this direction. And I was so embarrassed by this that I didn't tell anyone. And so everybody's asking me, well, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I just wouldn't tell anybody what I was going to do. Because all my coworkers were finding other jobs and all this stuff. And I'm just, quite trying to hide so I don't have to tell them I'm going to be a pro blogger.
I'm going to go make money on the internet. Yeah. Everybody else.
And to add to the absurdity, I had been doing this about a year and working, 10 hours a week on this blog and making a total of $100 per month at that point. So it was just absolutely insane, just completely crazy. But it was something I felt like the Lord was leading me to do. And so we did it. We jumped ship, and I became a full-time blogger in 2008, even though the blog couldn't even maybe pay our electric bill at that point, And
how are you making $100 a month? How did you figure that out?
How was I?
Yeah.
Google AdSense. I think I just had AdSense ads on blog or something like that. Yeah. So that was how I started the whole thing, and, at the very beginning. But so barely making anything. And then the amazing thing, the kind of God story part of all this is that 9 months later, we were making more from the blog than I was my previous day job.
Wow.
It made no sense to me. And then 6 months later, it was double that. It was just a journey that I'm like, I couldn't have written this.
Yeah. So can you break that down? How did that happen? Well, how did you go to making your salary 9 months later, and then after that, double?
I couldn't do it again. I just put it in the hands of, this was a miracle that God was just doing. But all that said, I can talk about some of the specific things I did, but again, we're going back 2008, so the relevancy may not be super strong. But
listen, I was there, and I was not making my salary online. In fact, I was making $0. So I'm very curious.
Yeah. So, one of the way I started, I happened to have a mentor who was really proficient in SEO. And so that was kind of the big thing that got me moving off the ground. I had an inside knowledge of how to rank articles in Google and whatever else. And so that helped. But obviously, there's a transition point. And I think the lesson to take away from this, if there's some value to add for anybody listening, it's that first year, I think it's like this with a lot of businesses. You lay a foundation, you know what I mean? Or you plant a seed in the ground and you might see a seedling, but you're not really seeing any fruit yet, So an apple tree doesn't really bear fruit till about 5 years or something, So you have a while before you start seeing some fruit. And in this case, I think that year-long period was foundation building stuff. From an SEO perspective, this makes a whole lot of sense, but I think it applies to probably starting a podcast or any other kind of venture like that. Where there's a season of just kind of building a foundation where you might not see the fruit that you want. And I think that that's what that 1 year period was. And then as we transitioned, I now had a lot more time and focused energy to put towards the business, coupled with, I think, some unique open doors that God, led me to. And and I think the rest is history.
So to get nitty gritty, Was it the Google, you just got so much traffic because of your SEO and optimizing all of that Google AdSense just started to multiply? Or did you start offering products, services? Like what happened in that year where you saw the rise?
No products, no services. At the beginning, like my first probably 5-6 years of being a professional blogger was all Google AdSense. Like that was it. And I'm a little bit of an analytical guy. I'm a little bit of an engineer mindset a little bit. And so I broke it down. I got really nerdy about, all right, where are the best ad placements? What are the best colors to use on the ads? Like, all these different things. And then on top of that, like, all right, certain traffic from different articles might do better with ads in these places. Like, so I got really analytical and nerdy on all that. And I think that helped to a degree. But yeah, at the beginning, like we were not diversified at all because probably 90% of our traffic came from Google and 90% of our earnings came from Google AdSense.
Okay,
which was
great.
Kind of a scary place to be.
Well, let's pull that thread a little bit more. So that's the first number of years, half dozen years.
Yeah.
And then how did you diversify and what have you done since then?
Yeah. So next step was I realized affiliate. There began more and more affiliate programs for different things. And I realized, wait a minute, AdSense is just a middleman. I can just go direct to the company that AdSense is promoting on my site and get paid more. And so then I began kind of get involved in more affiliate programs for different things. So if it was whatever, some financial tool or budgeting software or whatever else, it's like I can have AdSense put an ad up there and I'll make $1 a click, or I can go direct to them, the budgeting software or something like that. And I can get $15 if somebody clicks over and buys. And so it just made more sense.
Right.
And so I began doing more and more like affiliate type stuff, typically review articles. I liked that approach because I never wanted, especially now and even then, the real hard sell kind of twist your arm type affiliate stuff. Like that doesn't work, but like an honest review of someone who's used the product. And this is what I don't like about it. Like that type of stuff, worked great then. And I still think it works good now. Like just being really honest about it. And in fact, fun fact, we had certain products. I didn't write a lot of negative reviews, but there were some where it's like, I just said, I don't like this because of this, this, and this, but we used an affiliate link because like, why not? And some of those things actually converted really, really well. So
I don't like this product. It's disappointed me, but if you want it, here it is. And then people go out and buy it and you get a commission.
Yeah. So it's funny how that works.
Funny. All right. And then to where you are today.
Yeah. So now we've transitioned and, we still do some affiliate stuff. We actually don't have any AdSense on our website at this point. But now we're primarily focused on our own products. So we have, a variety of different courses and we have a live financial class that we're doing. And so stuff like that is kind of our main focus of our revenue at this point.
It feels like you evolved very well with the web. That sounds like you just gave a history of the internet and online marketing for the last almost 15 years, right? That seems very reasonable. But okay, let me ask you this. Finance. That's not an empty space. I mean, you've got Dave Ramsey, who's got millions of listeners a day. You've got Mr. Money Mustache on the internet. Yeah, exactly. Who is that? Yeah. He's been a guest on this podcast, or will be by the time this is up. And we've had a lot of his folks on. You've got Mr. Money Mustache. You've got this is crowded space. You've got a lot of people. And I know I'm thinking of the leader who's listening going, yeah, I'm going to get into the leadership space. Good luck with that. Or I'm going to get into the finance space or the dieting space or the whatever space. How did you carve out a niche?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a big world. It's a big internet. And there's a lot of people out there. And I think when it is a crowded space, I think that's often a clue that there's a lot of demand in that space.
Yeah.
In the case of some of the people you mentioned, and I mean, I could name hundreds of others, there's a lot of people in the space. I think the key is really getting specific about who the person is that you're talking to. Because as someone scales and grows, they can't be as super specific. It tends to get wider of the net of the people that they're talking to. So it's kind of like, a jet ski versus a cruise ship. Like there's advantages to both, but a jet ski can be a lot more nimble and can be a lot more targeted. And so I think that that's something that we've just focused on. We're specifically targeted towards a Christian. Like we talk about money as if like to someone who we assume has the same beliefs as us. And that cuts out a whole bunch of people. But by doing so, we get to speak more accurately to them than I think a lot of other people can. And I think that's helped us a lot.
Have you defined it beyond that? Like, are you picking, we talked about this with Jasmine Starr a few years ago on the podcast, but defining your ideal client. Is he a 20-year-old male a day away from his 21st birthday with a broken down vehicle at the side of the road and $7 in his bank account? Is it that specific? Is it broader than that? Like, how have you handled that?
Yeah, I mean, we can go into a little bit more of that.
I would like to. Yeah, this is important stuff.
Yeah. I mean, we're more specific about it internally. We don't make this super pronounced, but yeah, it's like we are speaking to someone who's probably a millennial, probably, let's say, maybe Gen Z, 20 to 45. Like that's our main group. That's our bread and butter, who we thrive with and who we can really help. And we're also not, we're not the best option for people who are just in complete financial mess, in despair.
Right.
And the reason is because that's not my world. Like I shared some of where I came from, but I've never been one of those people who, has had my cars repossessed and all this stuff, like where it's like, that's a world that I don't understand. And therefore that's not who I can help the most. But I can help someone who's really hungry and who wants to do the work and who just believes that there's a lot more possible. And that's kind of the mindset of the person who I think we can help the best.
There's a counterintuitive sense, because I agree with you, Bob, but there's a counterintuitive sense in which people would say, but wait, I have to reach everybody. So you think about the church leaders listening, the business leaders listening. There is a temptation, and I've wrestled with this in my own life, where it's like, no, but I get that, but I want to reach everybody. And it's really hard to say, like when I started this podcast, I picked 2 targets. I don't think I've said this out loud, and I better tell him before it airs. But I picked the average pastor of a church of 200 or less, and I kind of have a little backstory. And I picked Craig Groeschel, who at the time I did not know. And sure enough, I've gotten to know Craig, and he's been a frequent guest and the whole deal. But I'm like, I want it to work for those 2 demographics. Yeah. What is it about picking a very specific avatar, ideal client that counterintuitively attracts more people? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. No, we both know this is true. Like there's this old, copywriting adage of the riches are in the niches. It's like there's something about getting really specific with the person you're talking to. And I remember I was reading something about, I was learning about sales writing a little bit just recently. I was listening to this guy's podcast, and he was explaining that, the best success, the best tweak or hack that they've ever done to a sales page of theirs was when they can so perfectly define to the visitor their problem. It's like, it's not even about convincing them to buy. It's about defining the problem that they have in such specificity that they're like, this person just understands me so well. And in doing so, like he said, their sales just went through the roof. And I think we live in an era with so much noise, and we all say this every time. It's like it's a distracted world that we live in. And so when we can find someone who knows exactly what we are going through, I don't know. I just think there's a lot more power in that.
Well, I agree 100% with you on that. And as we're recording this, I'm developing a course on online influence and marketing, and I think that's a key to it. It's being able to identify somebody's pain point. All the marketing stuff would show that. How have you and your wife Linda done that on SeedTime? Like what is language? It's like, it's one thing to say, wouldn't you like to have money in the bank? That's very general. Or wouldn't you like to feel financially secure? Very general. Do you need to get more specific than that? And if so, how, Bob? Like what would be some typical language to describe your customer? How would you do that? Because I think this is good exercise for every leader listening.
Yeah. Well, just being completely honest, like this is, I think for us, been one of the most difficult things in our business, like in my last 15 years of doing this. And the reason why, and I think everybody probably has this excuse or this feeling of, well, it's just particularly hard in my business, whatever. And so in our case, some of the things that we're wrestling with is how do we communicate what you're talking about? How do we communicate building wealth but not doing it in a way that sounds really scammy or whatever, all these other things, because it's really easy to get off to these extremes really, really quickly. And then particularly with the Christian space, it adds a whole nother of complexity because Christians and money and all the, because the extremes on both sides of that can be really weird and nasty really fast too. So how do we communicate this?
You're either broke or a trillionaire or, health and wealth and prosperity. Yeah, it can get weird fast. I agree.
Yeah, for sure. And on top of that, like I, have this mission in my heart to not be a cheesy Christian. And so how do we do this in a way too, where we're not cheesy? Because so much Christian stuff tends to be, or can be cheesy. And So anyway, we've just wrestled with fighting this and trying to figure out this perfect balance, and we are not there yet. But we're on our way. But I think the most important thing is to actually have these honest questions and to be thinking about it and evaluating it. And that's kind of where we are with it. We don't have any solutions that we've nailed down. We're like, we've 100% hit this yet, but we're trying, Carey.
No, I know. And we wrestle through that all the time. So just a little bit of an object lesson. While we get to the next question, I remember writing a sales page for a course that myself and Mark Clark did called Art of Better Reaching, and my team was working on it. And, what do you put on that top header? And we really thought about it. And, one of my pet peeves, whether I'm preaching or whatever, is don't try to answer questions that nobody is asking, right? Yeah. Nobody's asking, what is the percentage of church decline in America in the last 18 years? Like nobody woke up going, gee, I wonder what that, and there is Google for that. Yeah. So we debated a lot of different headlines, like grow your church or this or that. And you know what we ended up with was just like a thought bubble, just a phrase. And it was, I just don't know why my church isn't growing faster. Or I think it might've been, I just don't know why my church isn't growing. Another guy, Ramit Sethi, who I follow and hope to have on this podcast one day. Ramit, if you're listening, hit me up. Anyway, Ramit says, because he teaches financial stuff as well. Same lane you do, not from a faith. Oh, he's a brilliant copywriter. I've bought his courses, some of them, but I subscribe to his emails just to learn how to write better. And one of the things he says is you could say, and I'm doing this case study because this is what you do, and this is what our listeners do every day as they try to read people's mail and figure out how they're going to communicate with them in a way that connects. You could say, do you wish you had, an extra $3,000 in the bank? Or he just said, this is what it feels like. You go out with a bunch of friends, and don't you wish you could just pick up the check? Mm-hmm. Now that's like real language, and you're like, oh, I'd love to be in a place where I could just pick up the check. Or I wish I didn't have to divide the bill so equally or feel bad about that guy who spent extra. And now how do I finagle out of that? And that's like, oh, everybody has been there. I've been there. I don't know whether you've been there, but I'm now you're speaking my language. So you're talking about, when you talk about copywriting, trying to figure out how to communicate that way. Is that right?
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. No, that's really good. And I love that. And I've looked at a lot of Ramit stuff for that same reason, because he's really good at that.
He's a genius. He really is. What are some of the pain points you see in the audience you serve? What are their FAQs, their complaints, their pain points? What are the repeating issues that keep coming up?
I think a lot of them tend to be the same things that I dealt with. Like for me, one of the things that really was an issue for me, I actually just wrote an email about this the other day, recounting a story of when I worked in one of my last corporate jobs. And I worked for a boss who had a really peculiar rule that she had. And she had a 3-strike rule where if you were late 1 minute, 3 times in a year, you'd be fired.
Whoa.
And this wasn't a department where it's like, this is that big of a deal. It wasn't like brain surgery or anything. Anyway, it just was kind of an absurd rule. And I remember after I had 1 strike, my second impending strike, I think, was after a snowstorm, and I was going to be late for a snowstorm. And I was freaking out about this because if I got the second strike, then I would 1 more strike. And, and I was living paycheck to paycheck at the time. And so this was just a big deal. Like if I got fired, everything comes crumbling down. And I just felt like that boss owned me. And I hated that feeling of her having that much control over me. that my whole livelihood and existence, everything depended on this silly little rule that she created. And then, to contrast that, I had another buddy in a kind of online entrepreneur space. His name's Matt, and he runs a blog, DIY Natural. And he was doing this blog, doing it full-time for a few years. And he's a people person. He decided, you know what? I'm going to go get a job at Bread Company. And so he goes and gets a job at Bread Company, not because he needs the money, but just because he wants to spend time around people. And anyway, so I thought that was pretty hilarious, but it was really funny. A couple months later, after he got this job, I was talking to him and his spouse, and he ends up saying, yeah, I quit. And he explained why. He's like, yeah, I put in my vacation request to take off time like 2 months in advance. And then they called me a week before and said, sorry, we can't do it. And he's like, well, I put it in. And they're like, sorry, you can't have the vacation time off. And he said, okay, well, I guess I quit, and just, walked away. And like, he didn't care. Like, he didn't need the money. And so like, I think that when I think of financial freedom, like that kind of freedom to not be a slave to a boss, like that has always been really enticing to me and a really big motivator. And I think that a lot of the people that we're speaking to, that's something that they want as well. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's so good. That was like a little mini class right there in copywriting. Tell stories like that, and your audience kind of leans in. So one of the things you said, you argue that a lot of what we have been taught about money is wrong. What do you mean by that? What's wrong?
I mean, I think the truth of it is just that we haven't learned about money. I think that's the biggest problem here. Because I remember being in school and learning about how to write cursive, which I don't use anymore, the Dewey Decimal System, which I don't use anymore, and a variety of other things that I don't use anymore, but they didn't teach me about money. Meanwhile, pretty much you and I and everyone listening, like we all deal with money every single day. So why is this something that we're not learning about more in school? Why are we not learning how to earn and how to manage and how to save, all these different things? And the tide's starting to turn a little bit, but we're a long way from what it should be. And so what happens when we don't learn about it, and the other part I'll add to that is that I'm fascinated by how many people I hear from who say, yeah, my dad always said in our house, we don't talk about money.
Yeah.
Like that's a pretty common thing. And so we're not learning about it in school. We're not learning about it from our parents. And so what happens is that creates a void that is going to get filled with something. Do you know what I mean? Because there are beliefs about money and habits about money that are going to happen. Like everyone listening has beliefs and habits about money. Like whether you intentionally created them or not, that doesn't matter. You have habits with money. You have beliefs about money. And the problem is when that void is there, they get filled with other things. And so the influences for our money beliefs become our broke friends, become Instagram influencers or credit card companies, like any number of different things. But that's where we develop our beliefs about money, which I think you'll agree, none of those are great places for us to be developing our beliefs about money. And so that's the biggest problem that I see with how so many people are learning about money and the decisions that they're making at this point in our world.
I would agree. It was really interesting. I came from a great home. We never really talked about money. And other than you should give 10%, right? But how to manage it, other than, and I'm naturally a spender. My wife had the same experience. And so we had to figure it out the hard way. And I imagine a lot of people are figuring out the hard way. So the framework for your book, or one of the taglines, is you quote Wesley, and Wesley's famous quote, I want you to give it to me, but your book's called Simple Money, Rich Life. But I've heard the quote before, but it hasn't seen as much daylight as you would think. And do you want to give us the Wesley quote and why that's become a mantra for you?
Yeah. So summing it up, we can go back and get the old English version, but I'll give you the modern day version, which is basically make all you can, save all you can, and give all you can. And I've always loved this quote. It's just really stuck with me, and it has kind of become our mantra for how we handle money. And I really think he was on to something with this because as we talked about in the church, there's a lot of strong feelings in a bunch of different directions with money. There's certain denominations and there's certain belief systems around money where it's like, you should not make money. Like you should try to be poor, like, because it's more righteous to be poor. And on the other hand, like we know some of the other extremes as well. But the thing I love about Wesley and his approach was, I'm going to make as much as I can. I'm going to save as much as I can. When he says save, he means reduce expenses, just not waste money on stuff. So I'm going to make as much as I can, reduce my waste so that I can give as much as I can. So it's not just make as much as I can just so I can build up, stores and barns and wealth on the earth, but it's like I can use the talents that I have, that God has given me, to do something with them and to impact the kingdom of God with them. And I just thought that was so cool. And so that's kind of the approach that we've taken, over the last few years.
Well, your treatment of it, even though I bumped into that quote before, was the first time I really understood that, oh yeah, okay, he's talking about reduce expenditures and live a simple life, rather than, because make all you can, save all you can, give all you can, creates a tension. It's like, well, how can you give all you can if you're saving all you can?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That doesn't make sense. But he was the original minimalist, maybe? Is that it? Did he have a very
for sure
frugal life, or?
No, he did. And he was a bit more extreme than I'm willing at this point. Basically, and I haven't read that much about him, but I forgot what it was, like 30 pounds or 40 pounds or something. Like, he had a salary when he was early 20s, and he maintained that amount for the rest of his life.
Wow.
Which ended up being, at certain points, he made today's dollar value of $2 million per year, which is pretty crazy for a preacher.
A lot of money.
200 years ago. So yeah, it was, but he was incredibly frugal. Which is part of why, in the book, the framework that we follow technically is make all you can, save all you can, give all you can, and enjoy it all. Because I do think Wesley could have enjoyed a life a little bit more.
Tiny bit more.
A little bit more balanced. But that's the approach that we take.
Yeah. Okay. So we definitely have some high income earners listening to this show, but we also have a ton of young leaders, many of whom are low income earners. It's pretty easy to give a conversation like this a pass, going, well, I'm not going to listen to the rest because I just, I make $30,000 a year. I make minimum wage. I don't know that I even have any money to spare. What would you say to people who maybe have that dismissal at this point?
Yeah, I would say that I completely understand, because in that last corporate job that I have, I was making $36,000 a year. Mm-hmm. And I remember how big of a deal it was for me to get a $500 a month raise. And I would work my butt off for an entire year to get a 2% raise. And then the thought of actually making any more money just seemed like such an impossibility to me. Because I wasn't raised with a mindset of endless possibilities, or anything like that. I just very much felt like this is your lot in your life. This is who you are. This is blah blah blah. But I'll just tell you from my experience. I watched, our story is just crazy what we watched God do in our lives, because I went from that $36,000 salary and watched that multiply many times over just over the next few years, and once you experience that, you begin to see the world in a different way, where you begin to see that more things are possible than you thought possible. And sometimes a lot faster than you think possible. And sometimes things are a lot slower. There's no formula here, but the point is that after having gone through that, I just see the world through a different lens of possibility. And so I would say to somebody who's feeling like that, I get that. I remember when it was super tight, and but that doesn't mean that it always has to be this way. And I think that, when you understand that there's a lot more there, even if you can't see how it could ever happen, I don't know, you have something to get excited about.
You talk about the most important metric and the second most important metric. What do you mean by those?
So I tend to believe, because in the whole financial world, there's a whole bunch of different numbers that you can calculate and evaluate and all this stuff. And I really like keeping things as simple as possible. So it's part of why the book's named Simple Money, Rich Life. And it's not because it's elementary. It's just as simple as it needs to be. You know what I mean? Einstein had some quote, something about that. Make everything as simple as it can be, but no simpler, something like that.
Yeah.
And that's how I approach things as much as possible. I try to take the most complicated things and make them really simple. And with all this, we've determined for us, there's two metrics that we really care about with our finances. And the first one is what we call AUM, or assets under management. And this is a term that's commonly used in the financial world. But we've kind of put a new spin on it. And so instead of, we use this to mean our net worth, so a lot of people know this term as net worth, and we've chosen to call it assets under management for two particular reasons. Like the first one being that as believers, we believe that it's a better term to use. It's a better term to use than our net worth, because there's something about a number being my total worth or net total worth of value. And this can go either direction, because when we started, we had a negative net worth. And so
I was going to say, there are people who have negative net worths, right?
Because that was the first thing we did. First time we calculated, we had a negative net worth. I'm like, wait a minute, is this what I'm worth? Or you have a $5 million net worth. And it's like, man, I am something. I am God's gift to earth, But the reality is that number has nothing to do with the worth that we actually have. And so therefore, I just don't love that term. And then the other thing, like specifically calling it assets under management, reminds me that everything I have, everything I've been entrusted with, is for me to manage for Him. Like, this isn't my stuff. This is God. I am a steward of what God has put in my hand to manage. And that is a good reminder for me to just stay aware that it's not my money, that I'm just strictly a manager or steward of what He's entrusted me with. So that's why we use that term.
And what's the second most important metric?
So for us, that is our second most important metric. Our number one metric is what we call our net given. And this is, I'll take you through a little story of how we got here. So after we had kind of started calculating our AUM and figuring all this stuff out, I found that, because I'm a numbers guy and I like to see things go up, and I found that I was struggling because my wife and I really had a lot of desires in our heart to be able to give a whole lot of money away. Like you're talking about the check, just picking up the check. Like, we like doing that stuff. And honestly, we had a desire in our heart from a young age to be able to give away millions of dollars. That was something we really wanted to do. And meanwhile, so we have this desire over here, and then over here, like, we have our AUM that we're calculating, and we're managing our money as best as we can so we can grow our AUM, or AKA net worth for those who forgot. And there's a tension here, because we want to give money away, but every time we give money away, our AUM goes down. And so I thought, all right, we got a problem here, God. And so I just kind of prayed about this. I'm like, how do I handle this? Because I have these two things that I want to do. And ultimately, I felt like He led me to tracking our giving. And essentially, kind of the logic here is, if the most important thing for us to do is to give, if that's the thing that we are most excited about, then we should be tracking that. And part of the revelation here was that if I look at financial success from an eternal perspective, from the world's perspective, it's about how much you accumulate. But from an eternal perspective, it's not about how much we accumulate. Like, that's like foolish, short-sighted thinking. But from an eternal perspective, it's a lot bigger and different. And so I came to the conclusion that, like, as a believer, like, I should be measuring financial success not by what I accumulate, but by what I give. And so that just kind of changed how we did this. And because that was important to us, we began tracking it. And so we called this our net given. And basically, it's just a running spreadsheet of everything that we've given. And we just total it up. And this way, we're cheering ourselves on, giving a high five. And it's not to get prideful over anything else or to brag to someone else, but just this is a goal. So this is something that's important to us. This is something we're chasing. And so Linda and I can give each other a high five when we reach a certain milestone. And it's been a really big motivator for us.
No, you see, what really amazed me, because, I sort of track my giving too, and generosity is really important to me. But I always thought about that as charitable giving, which in my life, my wife's life, tends to be about 98% of that goes to the local church. And then we have some other causes that we'll support at some meaningful level. But, at the end of the day, you get a tax receipt, you don't get a tax receipt for some of it, doesn't really matter. But that's our net given, as you would say. But you have a more expansive definition. Did I read that right?
Yeah.
Like, if I leave a tip at a restaurant, does that go on to the spreadsheet? If I... Like, what is, or if I just, give something away freely, does that, like, how do you calculate that? Or is it just charitable givings?
Yeah. I mean, anyone can take this any way that they want, but for us, we've kind of defined some kind of rules. So, like, tips at a restaurant, I mean, it's kind of like cost of the thing. So we don't really do that. But if I left a 50% tip, like, that's something I might put on the sheet, because that's a fun thing to do. It's an intentional act of generosity, whereas just giving a 15, 20% tip really isn't really an act of generosity. On the other hand, like if we had one instance where we sold our house to someone and as an act of generosity, we wanted to sell it to them below market value and below what we knew we could get for it. And so we did that. And so we added that to the sheet. If we threw a big party for someone and there's a cost associated with that, that's something that, we might add to the sheet as well.
See, that's really good to know, because as I think about that, I'm like, oh yeah, maybe it'd be good to track that, because I can see how that becomes addictive. I can see how that becomes
It's fun.
rewarding. And again, not to publish to the internet, but just as a private thing, that'd be highly motivating to me and kind of like, oh, that's good. And I find generosity is the best antidote to greed in my life. Hands down.
Completely agree.
Just that's what it is. It's like, why do I give? Well, God commands it. But secondly, otherwise I'm greedy and it 100% goes to me. And so the more I can give, the more I break the power of greed in my life. And I like that expansive definition. Is that available on your website, that spreadsheet? Or is it just like, no, dude, just open Excel or Google Sheets and do it yourself? Or
no, we do have a template on our website. I don't have the link off the top of my head. Maybe you can throw it in the show notes or something.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll check that out. What are some other easy keys to saving? Because saving is important.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we talk about in the book that I talk about this all the time because I think it's one of the most important things for a lot of people. Like money is different now than it was for our parents in the era of checkbooks and cash versus now. And so what's happening now is it's really easy to just not know what's going on with your money because you have Venmo and you have PayPal and you have cards here and there and all this stuff is happening. And it's really hard to get a holistic picture of your spending and what's going on.
It's true.
Or it's not hard, but this is what's happening for most people. And so they're just making all these decisions based on how things feel and blah, 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 blah. And it's just really squishy. And so one of the best things to do is to actually just literally pay attention to where every dollar is going, just like a food journal. So dietitians will tell this to you all the time. It's like, keep a food journal and write down exactly everything you eat. And just by doing that, you eat better. You eat less junk food, literally just by doing it. And it's the same way with spending. Like when you write down everything you spend, like you will spend less money. Like you don't have to try to spend less money, but you will spend less money. And so personally, I'm not a big fan of the write everything down, but there are apps that you can use. And just by doing that, so like Personal Capital or Mint.com, both of these apps will allow you to plug everything in. You can instantly see where you've spent your money for the last 3 months or whatever. And then just checking that on a regular basis, see what's going on. And so even if you don't try to make any changes to your spending, just doing that and paying attention, like you will spend less money.
That's good. Do you have any thoughts about cash versus credit versus whatever? There are some people who would say, don't even have a credit card. It's all going to come out of your bank account. Because I agree. It's a pretty fractionalized world right now when you think about all the different ways you spend money. And then, all the stuff that's set up for auto debit out of your account, right? Maybe to your credit card or, you got your Netflix coming off, then you have this, then you have that. Like it adds up fast.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think the whole cash thing, has gone the way of Route 66. Like, it's just that was a nice era, but like, there's no way we're going back. Like, it's and it's a really hard, like I know some people use budgeting envelopes and put cash in their envelopes and stuff. And I'm like,
it was hard in the 90s, man.
Yeah, like, if you can pull that off and buy everything with cash, like that's great. But I mean, even in 2020, like we saw tons of stores that would not take cash. It's like, all right, well, anyway. So the fact is that we're moving to electronic. We're already in an electronic era when it comes to money and currency. But in terms of debit or credit, like we have a couple rules with our credit cards that we follow, but. So we use both. We have a debit card and a credit card. But for using a credit card, like, because when we first got married, we couldn't handle credit cards because we had spending problems and they caused more problems. And so we got rid of credit cards. We didn't have credit cards for probably 7 years, but we started using them again. We made 3 rules for ourselves. And we said, if we violate these rules, then we're just cut them up and go back to a debit card. And so the number 1 rule was to never use them for discretionary expenses. And so my point with that was basically that I can't go to the grocery store and use a credit card. I can't go to, Lowe's and use a credit card or any kind of spending money thing like that. Because that was something for me that was going to balloon and get too big and I wouldn't have any control over it. Now, the credit card I can use for things that really aren't discretionary, maybe paying certain bills that I know, the electric bill. Like there's no temptation for me to increase our electric bill.
Overspend on power.
Yeah, anything like that. Like there's no temptation there. So it's kind of eliminating that temptation to overspend. That's essentially what's happening. And then the second and probably most important rule for us was to never carry a balance. Mm-hmm. And we decided if we never carry a balance, then we're going to be okay. We're never going to pay interest charge on this card. And so we made a pact that if we ever did carry a balance for 1 month, we just cut it up and be done. And I think that's served us really well. And I think it would serve a lot of people well to kind of create that rule in their life. And then the third rule for us was the whole reason we kind of opened them up again is if we're going to get a credit card, we're going to make it work for us. So it has to provide some good rewards. And that was something that was really important to us. But we quickly realized that there's a lot of potential here. And so we ended up over a 5-year period getting about 100 flights, 100 hotel nights completely free just from credit card rewards. And I think what most people don't realize is that, because there's a million rewards credit cards out there, but most people don't realize is that the difference between a bad rewards credit card and a good one isn't like, twice as good. It's like 50 times as good. It's like very, very different. It's a big, big difference. And so if you're going to have a credit card, don't just get one because they give you a t-shirt to sign up. Like actually get a good credit card. And so, yeah.
What are with it, and I really believe with you should never carry a balance if you have a credit card, et cetera, et cetera. But I've been following the points guy a little bit just to see because I'm paying for a trip this year, really just based on accumulated points. I wasn't able to fly anywhere for a while, so I've got over 1 million points on one particular card in one point system that we'll use to fly places. And are there, without giving just one thing, are there certain cards that you would say, pay attention to these, they're better than others? Again, with the caveat, don't spend yourself into debt, guys. Don't spend yourself into debt. But if you're going to use a credit card, what are some of the better ones?
So we've created a page on our site where I'm like kind of updating my current recommendations and stuff like that. But at the moment, like I would say Chase Sapphire Preferred it's a great card. It's one that I've loved for a long, long time. There's a lot of perks with it. And that's a great one to consider. From a business perspective, one that we've been doing, I don't know if you're doing any paid ads, Carey, but Chase Inc. Business. What we've loved about that card is they pay 3 times points on any ad spend, online ad spend.
Oh, really? So, like Facebook ads and that kind of thing?
Yeah.
I did not know that. Oh,
so if you're doing any ad spend, you can really, they can add up real quickly.
It adds up.
For sure.
I'll tell you that. Okay, I did not know that. That's good to know. Okay, and we'll link to everything in the show notes. Bob, this has been a fascinating conversation, particularly excited about the journey that you've been on. Any final word to people about how they handle money?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like I just want, particularly those of us who are Christians to understand that money is not a goal. Like this isn't something that, I don't know, because I think so much of the world, like just, it's all about the goal. Like almost every financial book out there is like the goal of making more money. And I think when we understand that it's not a goal, but it's a tool that God given us to fulfill whatever assignment he has for us on earth. And I think when we get that, like it changes the whole perspective of money. And I don't know, it just eliminates a lot of the noise and the distractions from the whole thing. And that's the thing I really want people to walk away with. Like understand that money is a tool, and we all have different assignments on earth. Some people have, an assignment that might require a bigger salary than others. But when you see it that way, I don't know, it just changes your perspective.
Well, Bob, thanks so much for sharing with us today. Where can people find you and SeedTime online? And tell us about the book.
Yeah. So the book, like you said, Simple Money, Rich Life, simplemoneybook.com. I think you can go and get it. If this is before the launch, pre-order bonuses, all that stuff there. SeedTime.com is our main website. And that's the gist of it. You can find us anywhere else at SeedTime.
Bob, thanks so much. Appreciate you.
All right. Thanks, Carey.
Thanks for watching the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. I hope today's episode has helped you thrive in life and leadership. And head on over to CareyNieuwhof.com. You can join millions of leaders over there who access articles, the home for this podcast, and a whole lot more. And I send out a daily email to about 85,000 leaders with a short tip, a little insight, strategy, or something to help you in your leadership journey. Check that out, and you can subscribe for free today. We'll catch you next time on the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube.